Hello, Integral Enneagram. I am recording this because Ted Grabowski recently posted another in what, as far as I have seen, is a chain of posts essentially decrying the application of type as a whole, really, but Enneagram type as a sort of dehumanizing institution whereby through our application of these discrete qualities to each other, we necessarily are failing to engage one another as essential humans. And he's right. I'm not sure if he deleted my comment on his last post or deleted his other post. If he hasn't, I will go back and see what it is I said to him. But he had offered, this video is prompted by his deletion of a post just a few minutes ago, wherein he posted a quotation from Martin Buber, whose book I actually have right here, and by whom I have been very inspired in the past. I'm going to read a passage actually that this tattoo is from. And that post was supporting, in Ted's view, I'm sure, his mission to admonish us to not clinging to these labels and whatnot, to remember the fullness of each other. And that is a worthy mission. However, it seems to me that it fails to recognize the intrinsicity, the intrinsicness of the objectification of humans. He had asked recently, and in the comments of this post that he just deleted, I referenced that I had commented on a prior post of his, the contents of which I will, as I said, if he hasn't deleted it, reproduce under the comments of this video. But I had said that I had referenced that prior comment saying that he had engaged with all the other comments except for that one that I had replied. And I had actually commented in response to his post. His post was something like, do you think that we make each other, that's what it was, do we make each other into nouns when we ascribe numbers to them? And my answer was yes, we do that. However, that's not a problem, nor should it be regarded as one. It can compound into a problem, certainly. However, it isn't intrinsically one. And I had hoped he would engage, because I had actually stood ready with quotations from Buber to justify it. And then lo and behold, a few days later, today, a few minutes ago, he posted a quotation from Buber, and I was like, well, this is just perfect. Unfortunately, he deleted it, and so I'm making this video. I'm going to actually just read straight extended passages from Buber. One, because it provides a little bit of context, ultimately culminating in a sort of thesis that I'm informally drafting here, but also because it's really good. You really should buy this book and read it. It's called I and Thou by Martin Buber, or Ich und Du in German. It'll be a few pages, so I'll try. I'm pretty good at reading, though, so hopefully it's entertaining. Page 1, I and Thou, Part 1. Man's world is manifold, and his attitudes are manifold. What is manifold is often frightening, because it is not neat and simple. Men prefer to forget how many possibilities are open to them. They like to be told that there are two worlds and two ways. This is comforting because it is so tidy. Almost always, one way turns out to be common, and the other one is celebrated as superior. Those who tell of two ways and praise one are recognized as prophets or great teachers. They save men from confusion and hard choices. They offer a single choice that is easy to make, because those who do not take the path that is commended to them live a wretched life. To walk far on this path may be difficult, but the choice is easy, and to hear the celebration of this path is pleasant. Wisdom offers simple schemes, but truth is not so simple. Not all Not all simplicity is wise, but a wealth of possibilities breeds dread. Hence, those who speak of many possibilities speak to the few and are of help to even fewer. The wise offer only two ways, of which one is good, and thus help many. Mundus vult decipi. The world wants to be deceived. The truth is too complex and frightening. The taste for the truth is an acquired taste that few acquire. Not all deceptions are palatable. Untruths are too easy to come by, too quickly exploded, too cheap and ephemeral to give lasting comfort. Mundus vult decipi, but there is a hierarchy of deceptions. Near the bottom of the ladder is journalism, a steady stream of irresponsible distortions that most people find refreshing, although on the morning after, or at least within a week, it will be stale and flat. On a higher level, we find fictions that men eagerly believe, regardless of the evidence, because they gratify some wish. Near the top of the ladder, we encounter curious mixtures of untruth and truth that exert a lasting fascination on the intellectual community. What cannot, on the face of it, be wholly true, although it is plain that there is some truth in it, evokes more discussion and dispute, divergent exegesis, and attempts at emendations than what has been stated very carefully, without exaggeration or one-sidedness. The book of Proverbs is boring compared to the Sermon on the Mount. The good way must be clearly good, but not wholly clear. If it is quite clear, it is too easy to reject. What is wanted is an oversimplification, a reduction of a multitude of possibilities to only two. But if the recommended path were utterly devoid of mystery, it would cease to fascinate men. Since it clearly should be chosen, nothing would remain but to proceed on it. There would be nothing left to discuss and interpret, to lecture and write about, to admire and merely think about. The world exacts a price for calling teachers wise. It keeps discussing the paths they recommend, but few men follow them. The wise give men endless opportunities to discuss what is good. Men's attitudes are manifold. Some live in a strange world, bounded by a path from which countless ways lead inside. If there were road signs, all of them might bear the same inscription: I, I. Those who dwell inside have no consuming interest. They are not devoted to possessions, even if they prize some. Not to people, even if they like some. Not to any project, even if they have some. Things are something that they speak of. Persons have the great advantage that one can not only talk of them, but also to, or rather at them. But the Lord of every sentence is no man but I. Projects can be entertained without complete devotion, spoken of and put on like a suit or dress before a mirror. When you speak to men of this type, they often do not hear you, and they never hear you as another I. You are not an object for men like this, not a thing to be used or experienced, nor an object of interest or fascination. The point is not at all that you are found interesting or fascinating instead of being seen as a fellow I. The shock is rather that you are not found interesting or fascinating at all. You are not recognized as an object any more than as a subject. You are accepted, if at all, as one to be spoken at and spoken of, but when you are spoken of, the Lord of every story will be I. Men's attitudes are manifold. Some men take a keen interest in certain objects and in other men, and actually think more about them than they think of themselves. They do not as so much as say I or think I as they do I. They take an interest. They do not give of themselves. They may manipulate or merely study, and unlike men of the I type, they may be good scholars, but they lack devotion. This I-it tendency is so familiar that little need be said about it, except that it is a tendency that rarely consumes a man's whole life. Those who see a large part of humanity, their enemies, of course, as men of this type, have succumbed to demonology. This is merely one of the varieties of man's experience, and much more widespread in all ages as a tendency, and much rarer as a pure type in our own time than the Manichaeans fancy. There are men who hardly have an eye at all, nor are all of them of one kind. Some inhabit worlds in which objects loom large. They are not merely interested in some thing or subject, but the object of their interest dominates their lives. They are apt to be great scholars of extraordinary erudition, with no time for themselves, with no time to have a self. They study without experiencing. They have no time for experience, which would smack of subjectivity, if not frivolity. They are objective and immensely serious. They have no time for humor. They study without any thought of use. Apologies. They study without any thought of use. What they study is an end in itself for them. They are devoted to their subject, and the notion of using it is a blasphemy and sacrilege that is not likely to occur to them. For all that, their subject is no subject in its own right, like a person. It has no subjectivity. It does not speak to them. It is a subject one has chosen to study, one of the subjects that one may legitimately choose, and there may be others working on the same subject, possibly on a slightly different aspect of it, and one respects them insofar as they, too, have no selves and are objective. Here we have a community of solid scholars, so solid that there is no room at the center for any core. Theirs is the world of it. There are other ways of having no I. There are men who never speak a sentence of which I is Lord, but nobody could call them objective. At the center of their world is we. The contents of this we can vary greatly, but this is an orientation in which I does not exist, and you and it and he and she are only shadows. One type of this sort could be called we. Theirs is a sheltered, childish world in which no individuality has yet emerged. Another perennial attitude is summed up in the words us, them. Here the world is divided in two, the children of light and the children of darkness, the sheep and the goats, the elect and the damned. Every social problem can be analyzed without much study. All one has to look for are the sheep and goats. There is room for anger and contempt and boundless hope, for the sheep are bound to triumph. Should a goat have the presumption to address a sheep, the sheep often do not hear it, and they never hear it as another I, for the goat is one of them, not one of us. Righteousness, intelligence, integrity, humanity, and victory are the prerogatives of us, while wickedness, stupidity, hypocrisy, brutality, and ultimate defeat belong to them. Those who have managed to cut through the terrible complexities of life and offer such a scheme as this have been hailed as prophets in all ages. In these 5 attitudes, there is no you. I, it, we, and us, them. There are many ways of living in a world without you. There are also many worlds with the 2 poles I-you. I-you sounds unfamiliar. What we are accustomed to is I, thou. In the original German, it was I, or ich, du. But man's attitudes are manifold, and thou and you are not the same, nor is thou very similar to the German du. I suppose it needs to be said here that what I'm actually reading right now is the foreword written by Walter Kaufmann, and not actually by Buber. However, this is, I think, maybe not necessary, but a very important context that contextualizes this and makes it eminently more digestible for us. Nor is thou very similar to the German du. German lovers say du to one another, and so do friends. Du is spontaneous and unpretentious, remote from formality, pomp, and dignity. What lovers or friends say thou to one another? Thou is scarcely ever said spontaneously. Thou immediately brings to mind God. Du does not. And the God of whom it makes us think is not the God to whom one might cry out in gratitude, despair, or agony, not the God to whom one complains or prays spontaneously. It is the God of the pulpits, the God of the holy tone. When men pray spontaneously or speak directly to God, without any mediator, without any intervention of formulas, when they speak as their heart tells them to speak instead of repeating what is printed, do they say thou? How many know the verb forms thou commands? The world of thou has many mansions. Thou is a preacher's word, but also dear to anti-clerical romantic poets. Thou is found in Shakespeare and at home in the English Bible, although recent versions of the scriptures have tended to dispense with it. Thou can mean many things, but it has no place whatever in the language of direct, non-literary, spontaneous human relationships. If one could liberate I, thou from affectation, the price for that would still involve reducing it to a mere formula, to jargon. But suppose a man wrote a book about direct relationships and tried to get away from the formulas of theologians and philosophers. A theologian would translate it and turn ich und du into I and thou. And then I skip the rest of the foreword, which covers the context in which Buber wrote and more about Buber personally, and go to the first page of the actual book, the actual first part, not what I had said earlier. The world is twofold for man in accordance with his twofold attitude. The attitude of man is twofold in accordance with the two basic words he can speak. The basic words are not single words, but word pairs. One basic word is the word pair I, you. The other basic word is the word pair I, it, but this basic word is not changed when he or she takes the place of it. Thus the I of man is also twofold. For the I of the basic word I, you is different from that in the basic word I, it. Basic words do not state something that might exist outside them. By being spoken, they establish a mode of existence. Basic words are spoken with one's being. When one says you, the I of the word pair I, you is said too. When one says it, the I of the word pair I, it is said too. The basic word I, you can only be spoken with one's whole being. The basic word I, it can never be spoken with one's whole being. There is no I as such, but only the I of the basic word I, you, and the I of the basic word I, it. When a man says I, he means one or the other. The I he means is present when he says I. And when he says you or it, the I of one or the other basic word is also present. Being I and saying I are the same thing. Saying I and saying one of the two basic words are the same. Whoever speaks one of the basic words enters into the word and stands in it. There is some more language about experience and engagement with other things, and I will continue reading. He begins another section. I contemplate a tree. I can accept it as a picture, a rigid pillar in a flood of light, or splashes of green traversed by the gentleness of the blue-silver ground. I can feel it as movement, the flowing veins around the sturdy, striving core, the sucking of the roots, the breathing of the leaves, the infinite commerce with air, with earth and air, and the growing itself in its darkness. I can assign it to a species and observe it as an instance, with an eye to its construction and its way of life. I can overcome its uniqueness and form so rigorously that I recognize it only as an expression of the law, those laws according to which a constant opposition of forces is continually adjusted, or those laws according to which the elements mix and separate. I can dissolve it into a number, into a pure relation between numbers, and eternalize it. Throughout all of this, the tree remains my object, and has its place in its time span, its kind and condition. But it can also happen, if will and grace are joined, that as I contemplate the tree, I am drawn into a relation, and the tree ceases to be an it. The power of exclusiveness has seized me. This does not require me to forego any of the modes of contemplation. There is nothing that I must not see in order to see, and there is no knowledge that I must forget. Rather is everything, picture and movement, species and instance, law and number, included and inseparably fused. Whatever belongs to the tree is included, its form and its mechanics, its colors and its chemistry, its conversation with the elements and its conversation with the stars, all this in its entirety. The tree is no impression, no play of my imagination, no aspect of a mood. It confronts me bodily and has to deal with me as I must deal with it, only differently. One should not try to dilute the meaning of the relation. Relation is reciprocity. Does the tree then have consciousness similar to our own? I have no experience of that. But thinking that you have brought this off in your own case, must you again divide the indivisible? What I encounter is neither the soul of a tree nor a dryad, but the tree itself. When I confront a human being as my you, and speak the basic word, I, you, to him, then he is no thing among things, nor does he consist of things. He is no longer he or she, limited by other he's and she's, a dot in the world grid of space and time, nor a condition that can be experienced and described, a loose bundle of named qualities. Neighborless and seamless, he is you and fills the firmament. Not as if there were nothing but he, but everything else lives in his light. Even as a melody is not composed of tones, nor a verse of words, nor a statue of lines, one must pull and tear to turn a unity into a multiplicity. So it is with the human being to whom I say you. I can abstract from him the color of his hair, or the color of his speech, or the color of his graciousness. I have to do this again and again, but immediately he is no longer you. And even as prayer is not in time, but time in prayer, the sacrifice not in space, but space in the sacrifice, and whoever reverses the relation annuls the reality. I do not find the human being to whom I say you in any some time and somewhere. I can place him there and have to do this again and again, but immediately he becomes a he or a she, an it, and no longer remains my you. As long as the firmament of the you is spread over me, the tempests of causality cower at my heels, and the whirl of doom congeals. The human being to whom I say you, I do not experience, but I stand in relation to him, in the sacred basic word. Only when I step out of this do I experience him again. Experience is remoteness from you. The relation can obtain even if the human being to whom I say you does not hear it in his experience, for you is more than it knows. You does more, and more happens to it than it knows. No deception reaches this far. Here is the cradle of actual life. Skipping a section, I continue. What, then, does one experience of the you? Nothing at all, for one does not experience it. What, then, does one know of the you? Only everything, for one no longer knows particulars. The you encounters me by grace. It cannot be found by seeking. But that I speak the basic word to it is a deed of my whole being, is my essential deed. The you encounters me, but I enter into a direct relationship to it. Thus the relationship is election and electing, passive and active at once. An action of the whole being must approach passivity, for it does away with all partial actions, and thus with any sense of action, which always depends on limited exertions. The basic word, I, you, can be spoken only with one's whole being. The concentration and fusion into a whole being can never be accomplished by me, can never be accomplished without me. I require a you to become. Becoming I say you. All actual life is encounter. The relation to the you is unmediated. Nothing conceptual intervenes between I and you, no prior knowledge and no imagination, and memory itself is changed as it plunges from particularity into wholeness. No purpose intervenes between I and you, no greed and no anticipation, and longing itself is changed as it plunges from the dream into appearance. Every means is an obstacle. Only where all means have disintegrated, encounters occur. Skipping some more pages. And continuing here. Apologies. I'll just begin arbitrarily halfway through this page. The it world hangs together in space and time. The you world does not hang together in space and time. The individual you must become an it when the event of relation has run its course. The individual it can become a you by entering into the event of relation. These are the two basic privileges of the it world. They induce man to consider the it world as the world in which one has to live and also can live comfortably, and that even offers us all sorts of stimulations and excitements, activities and knowledge. In this firm and wholesome chronicle, the you moments appear as queer, lyric, dramatic episodes. Their spell may be seductive, but they pull us dangerously to extremes, loosening the well-tried structure, leaving behind more doubt than satisfaction, shaking up our security, altogether uncanny, altogether indispensable. Since one must, after all, return into the world, why not stay in it in the first place? Why not call to order that which confronts us and send it home into objectivity? And when one cannot get around saying you, perhaps to one's father, wife, companion, why not say you and mean it? After all, producing the sound Y-O-U with one's vocal cords does not by any means entail speaking the uncanny basic word. Even whispering an amorous you with one's soul is hardly dangerous, as long as, in all seriousness, one means nothing but experiencing and using. And this is why I pulled out this book for Ted here. One cannot live in the pure present. It would consume us if care were not taken that it is overcome quickly and thoroughly. But in pure past one can live. In fact, only there can a life be arranged. One only has to fill every moment with experiencing and using, and it ceases to burn. And in all seriousness of truth, listen. Without it, a human being cannot live. But whoever lives only with that is not human. And I interpret Ted as essentially arguing for this IU state of relation between us and recognizing rightfully that to turn a unity of another human is to turn it into a multiplicity, but to do that it requires pulling and tearing, as Buber wrote. The issue with decrying all multiplicity, all objectification, all I-it relation is that we can't sustain it. We cannot encounter the McDonald's cashier with our whole being. It would consume us if care were not taken that it is overcome quickly and thoroughly. We can hardly stand in full relation, IU relation with our lover, our parent, our child. We certainly cannot hold open the gates of our ego to everyone at all times. In many ways, I see the enneagrammatic instinct, SX, as representing this IU relation, this loss of ego boundary through which we confront the essence of another. However, David Gray calls SX the death instinct. And there are many ways that it's very clearly true that without the SP instinct, which I might say is similar to I-it, it is very much harshly delineating the ego boundary between I and not I. And you would be consumed by the fire of SX, essentially, if you were to persist in that with no self-preservation, with no objectification. And objectification ought not be regarded as a evil or essentially dehumanizing thing in the colloquial sense. It is technically dehumanizing. However, dehumanization is necessary, and it is morally good that we do that. I'd be interested in a response to like the alternative position. Do you think that we can stand in full relation to the McDonald's cashier, Ted? I do not know. I do. I mean, I definitely think we can't. But if you think we can, I'd be interested in hearing that articulation. After this, I'm just going to continue. There's a few more pages where he talks a little bit. This is what I just read was the end of the first part. The second part begins by talking a little bit about the procession of the development of the I-it world. And I think I'll go in through and grab some timestamps from this video to put in there for ease of navigation, because this is way longer than I expected. However, I'll continue the second part here. However, the history of the individual and that of the human race may diverge in other respects. They agree in this, at least. Both signify a progressive increase of the it world. Regarding the history of the race, this is often doubted. People point out that successive cultures begin with a primitive stage that is colored differently, but always has essentially the same structure, involving a small world of objects, and thus it is the life of each individual culture, and not that of the race, that is held to correspond to the life of the individual. But if we disregard those cultures that seem to be isolated, we find that those that are under the historical influence of others take over their it world at a certain stage that is not so early, but precedes the great age, sometimes by immediately accepting it from a culture that is still contemporary, as did the Greeks from the Egyptians, at other times indirectly from a past culture, as Occidental Christendom accepted the Greek it world. They enlarge their it world not only through their own experience, but also by accepting alien influences, and it is only then that the it world, which has grown in this way, experiences its crucial expansion, which involves discovery. Let us ignore for the moment the overwhelming share in this development of the vision and deeds of the you world. Generally, the it world of every culture is therefore more comprehensive than that of its predecessors, and in spite of some stoppages and apparent regressions, the progressive increase of the it world is clearly discernible in history. It is not essential in this connection whether the world of a culture should be characterized more as finite, or whether we should attribute to it so-called infinity, or, more correctly speaking, non-finitude. A finite world may very well contain more components, things, and processes than an infinite one. It should also be noted that we must compare not only the extent of their knowledge of nature, but also that of their social differentiation and their technical achievements, because both expand the world of objects. The basic relation of man to the it world includes experience, which constitutes this world ever again, and use, which leads it towards its multifarious purpose, the preservation, alleviation, and equipment of human life. With the extent of the it world, the capacity for experiencing and using it must also increase. To be sure, the individual can replace direct experience more and more with indirect experience, the acquisition of information, and it can abbreviate use more and more until it becomes specialized utilization. A continual improvement of capacity from generation to generation is nevertheless indispensable. This is what is usually meant when people speak of a progressive development of the life of the spirit. This certainly involves the real linguistic sin against the spirit, for this life of the spirit is usually the obstacle that keeps man from living in the spirit, and at best it is only the matter that has to be mastered and formed before it can be incorporated. The obstacle for the improvement of the capacity for experience and use generally involves a decrease in man's power to relate, that power which alone can enable man to live in the spirit. And here's where I agree with Ted. We should be right to apparently comments have been turned off from my post now. We are right to distracted now by that fact. We are right to seek to live in the spirit, as Buber writes. We are right to engage one another with our whole being. However, we shouldn't gnosticize things and declare the abstract ethereal as the sacred and the concrete as the profane, such that to encounter one another as full humans is the only moral engagement, and to objectify them into bundles of traits, as it were, is somehow profane or immoral. There was I think just a single passage left that I was going to read. I'll just read this one passage. Spirit, in its human manifestation, is man's response to his you. Man speaks in many tongues, tongues of language, of art, of action, but the spirit is one. It is response to the you that appears from the mystery and addresses us from the mystery. Spirit is word, and even as verbal speech may first become word in the brain of man and then become sound in his throat, although both are merely refractions of the true event, because in truth language does not reside in man, but man stands in language and speaks out of it. So it is with all words, all spirit. Spirit is not in the I, but between I and you. It is not like the blood that circulates in you, but like the air in which you breathe. Man lives in the spirit when he is able to respond to his you. He is able to do that when he enters into this relation with his whole being. It is solely by virtue of his power to relate that man is able to live in the spirit. But it is here that the fate of the relational event rears up most powerfully. The more powerful the response, the more powerfully it ties down the you, and as by a spell, binds it into an object. Only silence towards the you, the silence of all tongues, the taciturn waiting in the unformed, undifferentiated, pre-linguistic word, leaves the you free and stands together with it in reserve where the spirit does not manifest itself, but is. All response binds the you into the it world. That is the melancholy of man, and that is his greatness. For thus knowledge, thus works, thus image and example come into being among the living, the benefit of the it world. But whatever has thus been changed into it and frozen into a thing among things is still endowed with the meaning and destiny to change back ever again. Ever again, that was the intention in that hour of the spirit when it bestowed itself upon man and begot the response in him. The object shall catch fire and become present, returning to the element from which it issued, to be beheld and lived by men as present. The fulfillment of this meaning and this destiny is frustrated by the man who has become reconciled to the it world as something that is to be experienced and used, and who holds down what is tied into it instead of freeing it, who observes it instead of heeding it, and instead of receiving it, utilizes it. It continues on. It really doesn't stop being good. The whole book is excellent. So I could just read the entire book. However, I won't. Ich Undo, Martin Buber, Walter Kaufmann's translation is my recommendation. It's so good. Please read it. I guess discussion question. I'll write in the caption. But what? Chad Solomon. Laugh reacting my post as an impotent way to demonstrate your dissatisfaction and discomfort with the words I speak. Same as always. Discussion question though. What do you see as the balance between the I-it world and the I-you world? Can we stand in full relation with everyone all the time? Is it dehumanizing in the colloquial sense? It is obviously objectifying to regard others as bundles of qualities, named qualities, to regard one another in space and time. But is that dishonoring of others? I don't think so. But I'm interested in the discussion, so I shall upload this now. However, I should probably upload it to YouTube because I fear that Damien will delete my post and thus the video along with it. I see Xandra is now joining in Chad. They're probably in their group chat or whatever, joining in their little schoolyard bullshit. Au revoir.